you very much for inviting us tonight. Friends of the Lake District is a charity and a membership organisation. We've got around 6,000 members. We're a landscape charity, and I'll touch on what that entails shortly. But we work to deliver what it says there, thriving Cumbrian landscapes for nature, for people, forever. And we do this by campaigning for landscapes that are tranquil. I'll come back to that word in a minute, tranquility. Tranquil, rich in cultural heritage and environmentally healthy. We inspire and mobilise people to work in partnership with us to protect those landscapes for generations to come. And we lead by example in demonstrating sustainability and conservation on the land that we look after, which is more than 600 hectares now across Cumbria, some of which we've been gifted and some of which we've bought over the years. So this evening I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what we do, give you a few examples of the kinds of projects we're undertaking to help deliver that vision. But I'm very much the warm-up act for my fellow Yorkshireman Jack, who'll give you a much deeper and more authoritative dive into an important project called Hedges and Edges. Now, I'd love this evening to be a conversation rather than a presentation. So we'll make sure we leave a good chunk of time for your questions. So if anything occurs to you as you're listening, please do seed it away and let's have a chat afterwards. Before we go any further, can I just ask for a quick show of hands? Any members of Friends of the Lake District here tonight? Ooh, that's healthy. Thank you very much. The rest of you will find a leaflet on your chairs. So please do have a read in your own time. And if you like what you hear tonight, think about helping us in some way. We're very old. We started as a public rally in Fitzpark, Keswick in June 1934. Those were our founders, a group of passionate people launching a small association with the aim of protecting the beauty, traditions and access to the landscape, and to campaign for the designation of a national park. Now that was before there were any national parks in existence, so it's quite an innovative thing to ask for. When we were established, our prime focus was on getting that national park going for the Lake District. However, since the 1970s, we've also acted as the representatives for CPRE, the countryside charity, for the whole of Cumbria. So we're the Cumbria branch of CPRE as well. So yes, we're called Friends of the Lake District, and we care deeply about the Lake District, but we also care about Cumbria. At the heart of what we do is campaigning to protect the landscape. Campaigning is about more than petitions and placards, although sometimes they are needed. It's about influencing people to bring about change. Sometimes that influencing requires us to raise our voice, but sometimes change comes about through quieter whispers, nudges, engaging people in collecting litter, or planting trees, or helping them connect more deeply with the landscape we love. As Sir David Attenborough once said, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced. Some of our recent campaigning has involved us having a louder voice, particularly over the adventure attraction planned for Elterwater Quarry. We were actually at the High Court yesterday and today. We are taking the Lake District National Park Authority to a judicial review over their decision to allow planning permission for the adventure attraction that will be run by Zip World in Elterwater Quarry. The judge said it was a complex case and there were definitely grounds that were favourable, and so he has reserved judgment, and so we should hear the outcome of that case in 3 or 4 weeks, we think. So some signs of optimism, but we're still waiting on that. Some of our quieter influencing includes the monthly videos we produce on various topics. This one actually here was from a few months ago when I took a trip on the excellent Ullswater hopper bus that you have in this valley. And I'm a great supporter of what Situ is doing here. It's an exemplar for other valleys of the Lake District, and it's talked about a lot at the partnership and other organisations that are involved in running the Lake District. So you guys are really leading the way on that, and we were very happy to make a video on that and publicise the great work that you're doing. But there's also, as mentioned recently, the quieter stuff we do around dark skies, light pollution, also led by Jack here. So we do a wide variety of stuff, including opposing the huge holiday park planned for Ron Head on the coast. That's not in the Lake District National Park, it's over in Cumbria though. I just want to talk a bit about the L word, landscape. What is landscape? It's more than just the view. It contains layers of complexity, and this slide shows some of them. Of course, landscape, anything really, is always viewed through the filter of our own perception. So landscape is different depending on who you are. But generally, at its heart, it's the relationship between nature and human culture, creating a character that's unique to a place. As a landscape charity, we look at how we experience that character, including human activity, land use, biodiversity, natural forms. So it really, at its heart, it's about achieving a balance across all that complexity. Now, the problem with landscape is it's a huge concept. It basically encompasses everything. So the challenge for us as a medium-sized landscape charity is, what should we focus on to deliver the biggest impacts? And about 18 months ago, we decided to run a big consultation exercise to see what our members, our supporters, and the wider public felt we should be doing. And those members in the hall tonight will have received a questionnaire about 18 months ago and hopefully filled it in. We had hundreds of responses. The results led us to focus on 5 aspects of the Cumbrian landscape: planning and development, biodiversity and climate, nature-friendly farming and communities, visits, access and transport, and water. Now, we deliver on these strategic themes through a mixture of core day-to-day work, like responding to planning applications or policy consultations, and projects. And we'll hear about Hedges and Edges in a minute. That's a big project priority for us, as it should deliver on biodiversity, climate, nature-friendly farming, and water, if we get it right. So ticks lots of those strategic boxes. But before I hand over to Jack, I want to touch on some of the other projects we're involved in to give you a flavour of what else we do. This is a good example. The Lake District is about 30 miles by 30 miles. There's about 40,000 residents here, but 18 million visitors a year. Now, many businesses rely on those visits, and that's a great thing for our economy. But it's a very challenging ratio to have 40,000 residents and 18 million visitors. And actually, that's a more challenging ratio than many other tourist destinations around the world, including Venice. It puts strain on our infrastructure, it puts strain on our communities. They're what we call the invisible burdens of tourism. So at the end of last year, we created a report called Who Pays for the Lake District? The intention was to kick off a conversation about options for raising revenue from visitors to fund much needed infrastructure improvements. Some of those options include things like visitor vehicle charging. Could we detect out of Cumbria vehicles as they come in to the park and charge them a couple of quid automatically? We could make a lot of money off that. If there are 18 million visitors, 97% of whom visit by car. There's also the option of a bed tax, an overnight occupancy charge, effectively. And several UK destinations, including Edinburgh, are already bringing those in. So the report contains examples from around the world, from Venice, the Balearics, Barcelona. This will be a long, complex and highly political campaign, and it's likely to involve the new Cumbria Mayor if we get a new strategic authority here. At the other end of the spectrum, research project that we're looking at is what we've called stealth expansion. We've realised there are several ways in which the number of tourist beds are increasing over time. Airbnbs being advertised, farmers building glamping pods, temporary campsites popping up, under the legislation that allows up to 60 days a year without planning permission. Now, That's all fine, but no one is monitoring centrally the number of effective extra tourist beds that this creates. We think it could add up to thousands over the past few years. And that's an issue because it will be affecting traffic levels, putting strain on infrastructure like refuse collection, sewage treatment works, even mountain rescue and doctor's surgeries. It's all people staying here, and a lot of them we don't know about because they haven't had to go, the people who've expanded their farms or their glamping pods or had their temporary campsites put up, they're under the radar effectively. No one is counting those extra beds. So we're going to gather together all the publicly available data that we can find, try to work out what growth rates are represented by this stealth expansion, and share that data. And here's an example of that landscape characteristic that was flagged to us as really important in the research I mentioned earlier, tranquility. Tranquility means different things to different people. We think it's a vital quality, and it's definitely about much more than just noise. Here you can see the sign on the entrance to our land at High Borrowdale. It says, tranquil farmland and hay meadows. Come in, explore, enjoy. Now, tranquility there for me is about remoteness, despite the fact the valley runs between the A6 and the M6. It feels very remote. The sounds of the beck that runs down the middle, the incredible sight of the hay meadow we've established there, the startled deer you come across when they thought they had the place to themselves. That's all tranquility for me when I'm walking in High Borrowdale. But last time I was there, my tranquility was shattered by a group of trail motorbikes riding illegally along the North Ridge. And that's the sort of tranquility detraction that we'll be looking at in this project. So-called green lane driving, both legal and illegal, but also other aspects of tranquility, like being able to see the stars at night. This project aims to come up with a tranquility map of Cumbria using volunteers to survey the landscape and input data. It's really interesting, it's really ambitious, and it was fascinating to hear that the judge at the High Court yesterday actually posed the question about the Elterwater Quarry development. He said, how should we be measuring tranquility? He said that in the courtroom because we were pleading our case, which involves what we see as the undermining of tranquility by the tens of thousands of visitors who are going to come in their cars to that small valley. And our case hinges on the undermining of that tranquility. And the Lake District National Park Authority is required to consider tranquility when it's looking at a planning application. But how do you measure it? The judge himself asked that question. So we're going to, coincidentally, do some work on that ourselves. So that's just a few examples of the kind of projects that we're undertaking alongside the core work that we do, like engaging communities with the landscape. This final picture from me is one of my favourites. It shows a class from Threlkeld Primary School on a cold, wet day building a willow den on our land near Blencathra. They absolutely loved it, despite the weather. The den behind them is sprouting magnificently this spring. So if we can connect with local communities and we can connect those communities with the landscapes of Cumbria, I know we'll be doing a good thing. Which brings us on to Jack. Connections are a huge aspect of the Hedges and Edges project. So it's not just about getting hedge plants in the ground. And he'll tell you all about that. So I'll leave you in his capable hands, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at the end.
Do you want me to move? No, you're fine. So under our theme, the three themes that Mike's talked about, nature-friendly farming, water and nature recovery, there's so many important habitats which have declined in the last 30, 40 years in Cumbria. But we thought we'd focus on roadside verges and hedgerows because they are both in the Cumbria Local Nature Strategy to try and improve and recover them. But importantly, as Mike said there, it's where a lot of people are going to interact with them. You know, there might be a right of way next to a hedge, or you might be on your bike or in your vehicle travelling along the roadside verges. In respect to the verges, we aren't going to lead on that. We will just work with some of the community groups. So we're working with the Cumbria Wildlife Trust Grassland team, and they will work with the two councils who obviously manage some of the verges directly, but importantly also engage contractors to do some of that work. And we will lead on the hedgerow side. That's just an image from planting we did on the Alpaca Base Camp Farm, which I'll talk about. And I'm going to cover hedge lane as well in the talk. So in terms of roadside verges, I don't know if you remember, but if you're as old as me and lived in Cumbria a while, in the 1990s, the Cumbria County Council developed a project. They basically mapped all 6,000 miles of roadside verges in the county and identified the 640 which were the most species rich. The bulk of them were in the Eden area, and then South Lakeland and Barrow. And particularly in the Eden area, it was those lovely wide verges, you know, those historic roots, particularly on limestone geology. That's where you had your richest flora. So at the moment, there's a working group under the Nature Recovery Partnership. We're basically collating all the data, both at community level and also even some of the old access databases of the species in these verges from the old county council set. So it's quite a challenge to get it up to date and make sure it's compatible with modern GIS systems. So that's where we're at with verges. So I'm going to focus on hedgerows, where we are leading on that. We've run a day. There's a leading person nationally called Megan Gimber. She works for the People's Trust for Endangered Species. She's doing some wonderful work getting hedgerows high up on the agenda, as is our sort of parent body in London, the countryside charity CPRE. So I don't know if you know, but there's a big document called the Environmental Improvement Plan, which is setting out some of the targets DEFRA and government, all the agencies are going for. Now on hedgerows, it is very ambitious. They're saying we need 50,000 miles of new and restored hedgerows created by 2050. Now, doing a fag packet calculation, as we've done, if you distill that down in Cumbria, then roughly we need 2,000 miles of new hedgerows and restored hedgerows, whether laid or coppiced and planting up the gaps in the next 25 years. So we need to crack on with it. A lot of hedgerows, you don't know, well, a lot of them, we often think there were a lot of them went in under the Enclosure Acts from sort of 1750 to 1850, but actually over half of them are a lot more ancient than that, particularly when you see them on old cobble banks. You know, some of them go back even to the Iron Age and, you know, as early as that. Some of them are called assart hedges, so actually the theory is some of the species within those hedges often curve. They're not in straight lines like the enclosure hedges. They're actually remnants of some of the wildwood when it was cleared, and they are hugely species rich and something we really need to protect and enhance going forward. So I'll do a bit of audience participation here. Looking at that photo, what do you think makes a good hedge? Come on, do chip in.
Bottom.
Yeah, a good thick bottom, that's right, Ian. Yeah, that's one of the ones. What else would you say?
Various species.
Yeah, mixed species. I think that is really important. Now, traditionally, in the last sort of 25 years, we've really pushed hawthorn-dominated hedges. But when I talk to people who are a lot more knowledgeable than me, there's actually quite a lot of new diseases coming in, like fire blight, which is affecting in Ireland. It usually affects fruit trees, but that will affect hawthorn and blackthorn. So the more diversity you have, the better. And also, there's a lot increasing. I've got Crohn's disease, and it is really important that I think about my microbiome in my gut. Now, there's a lot of evidence to show that livestock, and we're a livestock farming county in Cumbria, there's a lot of evidence that livestock browse on different species in hedges depending on what's going on in their bodies. So you're right, diversity is really critical. So the other ones, I'll chip in. There's no great gaps in that hedge, which is great, so you get a lovely continuous corridor, which is vital for all sorts of reasons, both for biosecurity, if you've got stock talking to each other or trying to communicate with each other either side of the hedge, but also for wildlife to use it as an access corridor, whether a bat flying or a hedgehog or a moth pollinating the flowers in the verges. The verges of the hedges are as equally as important, and particularly in Cumbria, you know, we often talk about peat bogs and woodlands, but actually permanent pasture is amazing for carbon storage. So the uncultivated margins of hedgerows are equally important, both in terms of carbon, water filtration and species diversity. And also food, you know, I've mentioned livestock grazing on hedges. I don't know if there's anyone in the room, I was going to say online, but there's no one online, anyone involved with the Patterdale Dog Day, but I'd like to introduce a new class. I'd like a hedgerow produce class for August 26. We could have an adult section, so a bit of sloe gin, elderflower wine, damson brandy, and then something for the children and everyone, so we could have jellies, jams and pies. So hopefully we've got someone who can act on that. And I'm sure we'll be able to chip in a bit of money to help it. One of the critical things is our climate is radically changing. You look at this ridiculous dry spell at the moment. I'm a fisherman and I grow vegetables. It's a nightmare at the moment. I'm having to water things and do rain dances so I can go fishing. But shelter for livestock, both in stormy weather and shade, is critically important. And if you project the likely temperatures up to 2050, hedges and woodland edges are going to be absolutely vital for the welfare of our livestock, for our farmers. And a lot of them who are future-proofing their land are thinking of that. This is really just to show, this is from the presentation that Megan Gimmer gives at PETS, but hedgerows, what I say, are an absolute winner. They tick every environmental box, you know, whether it's increasing water infiltration into the soil. It's estimated that just under a 100-metre section of hedge can have 2,000 different species of wildlife, 1,500 plants, 65 bird species, 20 mammal species. They're an absolute diamond because they cover different aspects of different habitats. And also, talking about the future of farms, a lot of farms now are doing carbon audits of their farms, and hedgerows are an amazing carbon store. And it's estimated all the UK hedges together, this is a conservative estimation, can represent a quarter of all agricultural emissions on an annual basis. So it's absolutely fantastic. So under the Hedges and Edges project, we're going to be focusing on working with farmers, landowners and contractors and some of the farm groups and clusters. And in this area, I'm liaising strongly with Dan and Maddie Teasdale, who run the fantastic community interest company. The biggest barriers to farmers doing hedgerow work is a shortage of time, a shortage of money, and the complexity and the uncertainty of accessing some of the funding streams. And that's our project is going to try and help them and break down some of those barriers so that they can help deliver those 2,000 miles of new and restored hedgerows. So there's a lot of planting taking place, and in your area, Danny and Maddie have helped facilitate 16.5 kilometres in the last sort of 4 years, and Danny's actually done a document to show they want to do another 100 kilometres going forward, and that, again, is an underestimation of what can be achieved. This is an example just near us, near Kendal. A fantastic organic dairy farmer, and again he's putting in his hedges so that he's got shade for his stock in future to support his carbon audit, and it's quite innovative because he's using cardboard guards, so there's no microplastics going into the soil. He doesn't have to spend labour time taking any plastic guards off in the future, and they last for about 3 or 4 years, which protect those young hedge plants against voles and rabbits and things like that, and obviously the double fence to keep your stock out, and if you do it not too wide but not too narrow, you keep your deer from jumping in and out. So that's creating new hedgerows, but also it's vital that you rejuvenate your existing hedgerows on a reasonable cycle. Now this is hedge laying. We've got Peter Gibson in the room, who I could big up. He's won the National Hedge Laying Championships 4 times. An absolute brilliant hedge layer, and I'm pleased he's come in, and he'll keep me right if I get anything wrong. But hedge laying is a wonderful craft, and importantly, it's an important diversified income, and the grant rates through the various schemes are pretty good. You can earn a decent living through doing hedge laying over the winter period when you're not doing other tasks in the summer. The Friends have traditionally run a hedge laying competition every year since 1977, and we increasingly get more and more people on that. This last year we've run hedge laying training days, which have been immensely popular, particularly, as I say, young farmers and new people wanting to go into contracting. So we're putting jobs into the countryside because, as Mike said, landscape is about people as much as anything, as much as nature. Using Megan Gimber from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, to get into a lot of the farm conservation schemes, you have to use an app which is called Healthy Hedgerows. And you basically map all your hedgerows on quite a simple basis. Farmers do that, and it gives them a sort of management plan for how to take forward the hedgerow management across their farms. So we ran 2 of those training days, one in Low Beckside, owned by the Ernest Cook Trust at Mung Grisdale, and one at Low Sizer Farm, that organic dairy farm I showed the hedge pictures before. We had 65 attending those events, 80% were farmers and land-based contractors, which was fantastic. And they are building their confidence, and they will take forward more hedgerow work on their land, and we'll be doing a lot more of that going forward. But as well as obviously supporting people who own and manage the land directly, it's really nice to connect young people and diverse audiences. We have done 3 hedge planting days with the Alpaca Base Camp team. Danny and Maddie helped get them into the mid-tier stewardship scheme, so they had 4,000 kilometres of hedgerows planted. They didn't have a lot of expertise, so myself and a colleague, we took 87 volunteers over the 3 days on that land. Mike and I have put a video in here, but there isn't any sound, so I'll just talk you through who they are in a minute. But that was just, I think it was the second year pupils from Threlkeld School came out and did a bit of planting on one of the days. And people absolutely love it. They really get a good sense of putting something back. And that was one of the hedge laying training days that Peter helped facilitate at Low Beckside Farm. This was the video I was going to show you. Unfortunately, there isn't any sound to it. Oh, that's fine. I'm going to skip that bit. So the hedges aspect, we're going to run that for 4 years. And this is what we're going to do. We will hopefully get news next week about a grant where we can appoint a hedgerow officer. We're going to focus on 3 areas initially. One, the Ullswater area, where we'll work with Danny and Maddie predominantly. And then we're going to work in the Howgills area, in the Yorkshire Dales, another upland area. And we're going to work just to the northeast of here on the River Petrel catchment, which runs, you probably know, from Penrith into Carlisle. So that's more a lowland agricultural system with a lot more dairy and a bit more cropping. So we've got a diversity of learning and things, but hedgerows are important in all those 3 landscape areas. As I say, the key thing is engaging and talking to farmers and landowners directly. When you're as old as me, there was a process called the Biodiversity Action Plan process, and all the usual suspects wrote thousands of documents, had hundreds of meetings, and it cost us a lot of money, and nature declined over that period. We can't let this opportunity lose. We need to deliver the goods on the ground and work with the people who have the control of the land. Hopefully there'll be a lot, as well as encouraging farmers to do the surveying of the hedges, we're going to hopefully train up a volunteer army to survey the botanical interest in roadside verges, but also survey the structural conditions of the hedges in those 3 areas over the winter, and then do some of the botanical surveys of short sections of the older hedges in the summer, so we can build up an amazing evidence base. Because what we want to do is put an economic value on the hedgerows within those 3 areas and for wider Cumbria, because sadly we've come out of Europe, which is fine, gives us flexibility to tailor our farm conservation grants to our needs, but basically there isn't enough money in DEFRA. So they know to deliver the target for hedgerows, we're going to have to bring in private sector finance to do it. So we're going to put an economic value on hedgerows to try and draw in that funding, and Danny and Maddie are working on that within your area directly as well. There's going to be more skills training. There's a lot of good activity take place, particularly on hedge lane. There's a lot of hedge lane takes place in South Cumbria and North Lancashire, and indeed through the brilliant work that Pete do and others, there's probably more in that area than any other area in the UK, but we need to start spreading that out to other areas of Cumbria. There's a lot of partners involved, and I could sit in meetings every day and not talk to any real people on the ground, but I try not to do that. But we do have to liaise. The Friends are only one player in Cumbria. It's a congested area in terms of conservation and nature conservation delivery. And I've already mentioned that we're going to put an economic value on the hedgerows. And I think that's me finished. Yeah. That's it. And this, as Mike said, that our membership officer was going to come with us and she does a marketing pitch, but we're not going to do that. You've had a leaflet, you can take it away and join if you feel so inclined. But hopefully that will give you lots of time for some exciting questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this mine? No, it's, you can keep it. I'll give it. Right. Thank you very much indeed. Can we have the lights on and then
I think we'll pass this between.
Oh, good. That's nice. Well, thank you, both of you, for your interventions, and sorry about the conditions that you've had to do it in. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that's going on, and probably so many different organisations with different backgrounds and interests, somehow overlapping or not overlapping, or it's interesting from where I sit within the Friends of the Ullswater Way. We're looking at all sorts of different ways where we can bring some expertise and knowledge into the area. As you know, we've just planted a new walk, the Wordsworth Way. So I suppose you could classify us as a walking heritage nature organisation. But the sort of things that you're very much involved in overlap a lot with work that we started a year and a half, 2 years ago on habitats, and we have Paddy here, who's the trustee, who's been involved in trying to put this together, and links with the Biodiversity Centre in Carlisle and so on. So it seems to me that there's a lot of synergy involved and a lot of potential for trying to create more, more bang for your buck. You know, everyone's working. Well, you are doing a lot of work on partnerships. Obviously, you have some privileged people you work with. But the sort of question I ask is, how can we get more of the organisations that have similar interest, more of them cooperating more closely to try to have a greater impact? But before I go off on a trail, maybe I can just open the floor anyway for people here and see if there are particular comments or...
I'll just come in on that point. It was great to be asked to come and talk in this valley, because I used to sit on the Lake District National Partnership and I've worked for 3 national park authorities. But in all honesty, where you join things up to maximise the benefits is at the whole valley scale, because it's linking community identity with ownership and knowledge of your local environment. Lots of organisations are in different silos, and that is not helping. And I think the work that Danny and Maddie do by creating the CIC, and they draw in money from the Rivers Trusts, from the Farming and Protected Landscapes funding. As I say, in this area of the 3 areas we're going to work on hedgerows, we will draw in other funding that they can to support some of the great hedgerow work they're doing. And the Lake District World Heritage Site, in terms of the various philosophies and interests, isn't unique in many ways, but where it is unique is where it combines with its amazing geology and those valleys of the spokes of the wheel which come out. And I think the whole valley working you're doing in Ullswater, in terms of your land, slowing the flow and your land management, your public transport stuff, is absolutely on the money, and we need to build on that. And I think it's brilliant. And I'm not just saying that because we're in this hall, but as I say, I've worked for various players, and this is how it needs to be. This is the best way of working on the whole valley scale.
Question, Miles? Yes, please.
Yeah, Two questions from my point of view, subjects of clear to my heart. Firstly, I think it's inevitable there will have to be some form of visitor payment for the National Park. I really support your initiative on that. And I think it would have to be a congestion charge payment, given that probably only 8 million people stay overnight in the village. How confident are you of succeeding with your campaign, given that I feel there is resistance from the National Park Authority and from local businesses? And I just wonder how confident you are that this campaign will succeed.
Well, so as you know, the concept of a visitor charge has been talked about for many decades in Cumbria, and I actually think that we are possibly closer now to airing this topic honestly, transparently, and maybe even getting somewhere on it than we ever have been before. And the reason is that I do believe we will get a strategic authority for Cumbria and a Cumbria mayor. And I believe that person will have power certainly over transport and possibly to levy an overnight stay charge as well, judging by the conversations we've had with Cumbrian MPs in Westminster. So the trick becomes, how do we influence the thinking of the candidates for Cumbria mayor? And we're exactly at the right moment to be doing that, because we should know by, I think it's September, whether we're going to get a strategic authority, and then the elections will be next year. So that's why it's perfect timing for us to release this report that we've done. We're getting a lot of traction in the media, BBC interviews all the time, and newspaper pieces as well. And we are also getting some interest from the folks around the table at the Lake District National Park Partnership. I can't say too much about that, because that is a private conversation that we're having. But I feel quite optimistic about where we're going with it.
That's the second. Car parking. Pooley Bridge is a designated transport hub. The National Park encourage parking in this area. We have a huge problem with parking in the village. And every time when an application goes forward, 9 times out of 10 it's turned down. Even though the National Park might support it. What are your views on parking in an area like Pooley Bridge or Patterdale?
We think that it needs to be planned strategically. So there should be parking plus public transport, so park and ride, properly planned, not just on a small scale, but on a large scale across the park. If we don't do that, but we just allow small car parks to spring up everywhere, you're just encouraging more cars. And that goes against all the policies, the stated aims of the Park Authority and the partnership and the government. So at the moment, we tend to not favour the springing up of small car parks, but to try to talk about the strategic rollout of proper park and ride, strategically organised parking plus public transport.
You opposed the site at Waterfoot on the approach.
Yes.
Despite universal support for it and undoubtedly the fact that it could be landscaped. What was your reason for objecting to that?
I don't have that to hand, actually. I can't remember, but I can get back to you after the meeting and discuss that in more detail if you like.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much for your presentations. I found it really useful. I've come to learn tonight because I wanted to hear exactly more about you as an organisation, because the organisation's changed over time, and it's good to hear what the latest things are. I think, and I declare my hand, I'm from a tourism background, so you will excuse and perhaps expect what I'm going to say. I rate the projects that you do, and I've got a lot of interest in them, and they're really, really good. But my concern is that You know, here we have a national park. It's a national park for the nation. It's for people to come and visit. And I'm concerned that your organisation comes across as being quite extreme and quite anti-tourism, which is possibly not where you intended to be, but on so many occasions it's been against the visitor economy and against what it's trying to achieve. And yet it's easy to criticise the tourism industry for issues that crop up, but we have to remember that Electric National Park is a historical thing. It's been here for many, many years. It's been here since Wordsworth. It's £4.7 billion in the economy, and it's 29% of Cumbria's employment. So it's very easy to criticise it, but actually it delivers a huge amount of benefits to this county, to the whole county, not just the Electric National Park. And it delivers a lot of security of employment. And it delivers a huge amount of service support for those things as local residents that we really enjoy. The post office, cinemas, shops, pubs, all those things that wouldn't be there without the visitor economy. So I guess my ask of you is to be more balanced, really, and to be your point about working to work more in partnership with the industry rather than against it. It does feel like it's a sort of a war of attrition. It seems like it's unnecessarily competitive. And that's not what I believe is the way forward to make our fantastic county move forward together. And to value it. I mean, I'm not Cumbrian, I've only lived here 45 years, so you excuse that. But, you know, I came here because it's a beautiful place, and it gave me huge inspiration. And I want other people to enjoy that. And it sounds a bit like when you talk about tranquility, it's a bit of a sort of an exclusive club, which actually only a few people can enjoy. And that goes right against my beliefs. It's a national park, it's for the nation, it's for people to understand. I mean, you mentioned about visits, but I'd like to understand more about how you see visits working out and how you see that being a benefit going forward. So a bit about economic impact, a bit about national park, a bit about community too. I mean, community support is really, really important. And communities depend upon tourism in this national park and outside as well. So that's really, really important. And my final point really is about outside the national park. I understand you're a landscape charity. Landscape is really important. That's the key driver why visitors come to the national park. But there are times with the landscape that there will need to be some sort of compromise. And the A66 During project is a classic example of that. I live right on the A66, in the town right next to it. And I'm afraid in our communities in the Ely Valley, you have lost a huge amount of credibility, because if you live in that area, you will know people who have been killed on that road, who've been injured, whose families have suffered intolerably because of the issues to do with that dangerous road. And you've campaigned against it to such an extent that another landscape or environmental charity actually put their big oar in, which actually delayed the whole process, which could and might still prevent the whole thing from going ahead. And I'm afraid that's really inexcusable from a local community point of view. So what I'm saying is, good projects, yes, I agree with that, lots of potential. We'd like to work with you as an industry, we'd like to work with you as communities, but I think there needs to be a rebalancing, and I'm not sure whether your trustees are up for that. And that's a real shame, because I think that's a part of it. So I'd just like to hear how you respond.
I don't disagree with anything you said, actually. I think there has been a perception that Friends in the past was too militated against tourism. Definitely a not in my backyard kind of charity. I agree with all that. And we're trying to change the perception of Friends to be a much more positive focused charity. We will still have to say no to some things, but we don't have to say no to everything. And we can also balance that perceived negativity with a lot more positive action, like some of the projects that you've seen tonight, particularly the environmental ones. So, yeah, as I say, I actually don't disagree with anything you've said. I think there is a... That said, though, we respond negatively. We respond negatively to less than 1% of all planning applications across Cumbria. So people do the problem is they're often the high-profile ones. So they get in the papers and people think we say no to everything. We really don't. There are many zip wire applications that we've actually just not commented on at all. It's not like we're opposed to every zip wire. So I do think we need to be careful about being too knee-jerk. and too negative. And I absolutely take on board all your points about the tourism economy and communities. And as Jack said, you've got a great example here in Ullswater. I mean, the Quiet Site is a fantastic example of tourism done well. Daniel's been kind enough to show me around, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. And so I think we need to be, as a charity, we need to be bigging up, we need to be talking more about the great work that's being done to encourage regenerative tourism, not just sustainable tourism, but regenerative tourism, tourism that gives back into the communities. I do think that some aspects of tourism have been a bit too extractive in the past. So they use the Lake District landscape as a backdrop for what is effectively just a purely commercial activity. But, as I say, I think that's changing. And I think that examples like the Quiet Site are moving in exactly the right direction, where tourism businesses realise that they rely on the golden goose that is the healthy landscape. And we may have gone too far towards damaging that golden goose, and we need to maintain it all working together, whether you're in tourism or not. So I hope that rambling answer goes some way towards answering some of your questions. Yeah.
So
I'll take him on as well.
No, not at all. No, I love Jim to bits. I worked at the Lake District National Park in the 90s, and I remember there was a heck of a tension between tourism and the park. And I worked closely with Ian Stevens before I came to the Chief Exec when we wrote the local plan, and we found more common ground than not. As Mike said, public intervention is often through the planning system, and our voice often gets portrayed in a negative way. But our members of tourists, all of our literature, all of our imagery, all of our messaging is showcasing the landscape. Marketing that the tourism businesses do doesn't show the harm, doesn't show us of queues of traffic on the roads or the 50% of Cumbria's carbon emissions from the way they travel there. So, as Mike said, I think we need to meet in the middle ground. And yeah, the A66 stance has annoyed people, 100% right. But in all honesty, I've worked on transport. It's the speed of vehicles which kills people. And we cannot just keep upgrading. I'm talking nationally now. We cannot just keep upgrading roads, putting more car parking everywhere. I think the sustainable transport solution for the Ullswater Valley is what Mike's saying. We need a massive park and ride on the edge of Penrith. You know, I know it's on the wrong side of the road, but look at all the tarmac which is left empty at the auction mart. You know, why not support the auction mart, get park and ride there and get buses coming here every half hour? That would be a more sustainable solution than just increasing car parking capacity in Pooley Bridge, Patterdale. You know, we can understand exactly, if you're a business, you've got cost of living, you've got worker problems, energy, you know, it's a nightmare. And we fully respect that. One of our strengths is that we're not embroiled in the coalface, so we can step back and raise debates on the bigger picture. And it can piss people off at times. But as Mike said, by putting in our voice with other people's voices, hopefully we can collectively come up with a better solution. So anyhow, I've probably rabbited on, not contributed much, but I think we are bedfellows because our members and our supporters are visitors just as we are.
Can you explain why you objected to the A66 improvements?
It's just not a long-term solution. You know, the biggest problem is you've got short sections of dual carriageway and then single carriageway, and it's often those pinch points which create the problem.
People get killed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to say that we encourage that's not the case. You know, there's 2,000 people get killed on England's roads every year, and that is appallingly wrong. But as I say, it's the speed of vehicles. And it's a bit like the housing problem. You know, the microcosm of housing problem is a failure of national policy framework. And it's the same with transport. We haven't invested, you know, since bloody Beeching, then we had bus deregulation, which knackered that. But I think Mike's right. I think getting a mayor and the change of regulation, I think the example of the minibus in Ullswater, I think that could be mainstreamed across the Lake District once we change things. You know, we're an international World Heritage Site, and yet our transport system is an embarrassment.
Well, so it's an embarrassment that the A66 isn't dealt all the way from Scotch Bonnet to Penrith.
I think we just need to park that and agree to disagree.
Where are you going to park it then?
Any more questions from the floor? Warren? Yeah.
Yeah, just on the tranquility, I mean, we've had a presence in Clydesdale for 170 years now. But for me, one of the biggest issues now is the number of events that are being held, cycling events, running events. I mean, if you take Elterwater, the Landale Valley, I actually supported the Elterwater for application. And we're at the point that, yes, you're going to have visitors going to the quarry, but if you look at the number now, and I've gone down that valley over the years, the number of events that's in that valley is unbelievable. You go down there every week and there's an event on. So the fact that the New Zealand Girl, National Trust, the car parks, they're all in the fields. And for me, you know, that is an issue.
Well, yeah, I think,
Something now as well, we see an increase in the number of events that are being held.
yeah, I think mass participation events are an issue. I don't know how we can solve that one.
The National Park used, I don't know if they still do, but they used to keep a register where all events were logged. But whether, I don't think they've got the evidence or the capacity to actually, you know, work out where the balance needs to be struck in the various valleys. Like I said, I think it's really up to the individual valleys to determine what number and what scale of events take place, because you know your territory, don't you? But it's a tricky one. It's tricky, particularly when the quiet activities, you know, fell running, cycling events, you know, the swimming, Windermere, you know, you can't discourage those people connecting with that landscape. But as you say, it's a bit like, it's all about numbers, isn't it, in relation to the host environment? And there's always going to be tensions, pitching the right balance.
But everybody comes in town.
yeah,
That's the problem. Not the, you know, the fell running, the cycling park. But they're all coming in the cars. If you look at Landale, it's getting absolutely hammered with events.
As Mike said, you know, I've hinted at it, we ain't going to solve that unless we need a whole strategic transport context, bringing people into the lakes in other means, affordable, regular means of certainty. And it's going to be it's going to take 30 years to sort out. And there's going to be tensions over individual car parks and things, but that's where collectively we should be aiming for. You know, Jim and you guys have done a great job, haven't you, lobbying about improving the rail service across and things, and, you know, Penrith rail station. That's just the tip of the iceberg where we need to want to go. You know, when I listen to Daniel talking, he's got that, you know, as a tourism business, he's thinking 30, 40 years ahead about waste, energy. You know, that's what we need to be doing on transport.
If you look at the tourist industry now, my grandmother and sister worked in hotels and running every 6 months. 6 months, come October, we'll laid off. The tourist industry is 6 months of the year. You know, I can remember going to Penrith as a kid. There's nobody there. So the tourist industry is basically shut down. It's now all year round. You've got the number of hotels now, you know, offering spas and all the modern facilities that people want. I think it's just bringing more and more people into the lakes. And there must be a limit on.
well, I suppose one of the reasons we published the report on the visitor levy was to show those invisible burdens of tourism and to have an honest conversation about them, because I don't think anyone has ever really talked about, we've never really come to a conclusion about what the carrying capacity of each valley is. No one has ever really done that calculation. And I think there's a place for the Lake District National Park Authority to do those kinds of calculations and say, actually, this valley, and this valley are probably overwhelmed at peak, but this valley, and this valley have still got a bit of headroom. And that's what I mean by thinking strategically about the way visitors come. At the moment, we're very reactive. You know, we hire rangers to try to chase people who are camping on the shores of Ullswater, but we don't really think about how to stop that happening in the first place or to improve education. It's not strategic enough. There's no responsibility being taken centrally for how the park works and how it feels and how tourism affects it. It all feels very reactive at the moment. So that's one of the reasons we published the report, not just to call for the visitor levy, but to highlight those invisible burdens.
It's quite interesting because a year ago or so we had our patron, Lord England, talking about sustainable tourism, and Jim in fact was talking as well, and Rachel from the Steelers, and that topic has been a regular topic. We talk about it, we come up with interesting concepts about how to go forward, but the translation of that into something at a wide scale, at a lake scale, valley scale, doesn't happen.
No.
Because, and I think you actually put your finger on one of the most, for me, most important issues, is we don't have the institutional structure at valley level to decide things. We're lucky enough to have an Ullswater Association here with, I think, 75 or so different institutions part of it. It has no real political role. Should it have or not? I don't know, but we have enough people in Ullswater who are pioneers, very creative, doing fantastic things off their own back, against the authorities often, sadly, because the authorities haven't pulled up their socks and gone on with it. So you've got individuals, and they're sitting in this hall, some of them,
Yep.
who are really desperate to move forward and to change the status quo. We all of us, I think, want to move forward. We see, in the case of Ullswater, 500,000 people coming in. There are 4,000, 5,000 who live here permanently. There's bound to be issues, when you confront 500,000 people with the 5,000 people who are trying to make a living here.
Yeah.
Often depending on those visitors, but the visitors somehow, culturally or I don't know, doesn't quite mix the match, and we haven't got the right authorities, I would say, to say, okay, let's have a valley-wide scheme. Let's have an institution that has the power to make that happen. If there are lessons to be learned in Ullswater, why not transpose them to Windermere or Brothers, whatever it may be. We don't seem to have that type of reaction. So maybe adding an extra layer, maybe, is a way forward, but maybe there are other things, I don't know. But what's frustrating for people who live here is there's so many good ideas, so many people want to make a difference, but the structures underneath that we have to work with, or the national institutions, the park authority, or whatever, they just aren't moving at the same speed.
No.
And so there's a mismatch, I would say an institutional mismatch, between all those aspirations of people who really want to change, make things happen, think long term, as you're saying, and somehow the structures we have it doesn't work. The poor Situ, and I have the privilege now to be a trustee of Situ. I've been following Situ for a while. They've done fantastic things, but it's a nightmare moving things forward. Gosh, I mean, why is it that Britain seems to be full of, blockers, who aren't making things moving in the way which most people like? So I can see from the tensions in this room on different topics.
Well, I used to sit on the Lake District National Park Partnership, and I shouldn't say this with Mike here, but he wasn't here at the time, and I lost the will to live after about 6 years of sitting in these meetings. I tried to get the management plan, and some people in the room know we piloted it, and there's pilots are on our website where whole valley planning. So ideally, in the national park, the management plan and the local plan would write a valley action plan owned by the communities, the farmers and the various interests themselves, and then all the various organisations would work collectively to feed in to deliver that. One of the best projects I've ever seen in my career, and I've got dark hair but I'm older than I look, was in the Peak District National Park. It was called the Integrated Rural Development Project. They only did 2 parishes, but basically they drew in European money, MAF money, county councils money, voluntary money, grant money into a single pot, right? And then any project bid to a local decision committee with one application process for a barn conversion, to run a community bus, to do some work on a farm, and it was streamlined. The outputs given was unbelievable because it got shelved. It never got mainstream because all these agencies are in silos and they've got their own, reporting things. We're working on hedges and edges, and it is and I'm working on light pollution. Just in DEFRA, the ruddy silos in DEFRA. So if you work on an issue like hedgerows or light pollution, which involves different departments, so we're not joined up at a national level. And the problems and frustrations we've got in the room are partly a symptom of all that unjoined upness. So you're right, it's about how you can get power at this valley level.
But the irony is that one of the successes of that planning process was the Ellswater Way. And it was because of local planning that people came together. And various communities all came together. And then they stitched up the little gaps. Yeah. And finally, in 2016, we had a walk, a right of the way all the way around the lake. And then it provoked our own organisation and others. Yeah. And that was real bottom-up, community-based consultation leading to concrete outcomes, and not blah, 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 but actually something which, was converted into something impactful. Situ is exactly the same. It was people being frustrated. We have to find the money, pinch resources from here. Bingo out. You get a hopper bus, and then you get a bigger hopper bus or different branding of the hopper bus, and suddenly, the Situ model is now the bee's knees for other valleys, and people are trying to model.
But I think if we get a mayor and they've got some powers to devolve down a bit of responsibility. The other thing, we've got 2 unitaries now, and they're quite high level, so and their budgets are short, so they're desperate for parish and town councils to take on more responsibility. But individually, they don't have the skills and resources, so they'll naturally have to work in little clusters and groups anyway. And at the valley, you can all work together as the few parishes under the greater responsibility. So I think the opportunities might come in the next 5 years.
I'll be dead. He'll be dead.
It's they're starting to come. The idea of a valley plan is excellent, but 6 or 7 years ago, we had the Ellswater Valley Plan, the National Park, 50 or 60 action points, probably 6 were achieved. Yeah. It was just talk. Yeah. But now, more recently, as you probably know, they're doing the VMAP, Visitor Management Action Plan, for Ellswater Valley, sponsored by Western Furnace and Cumbria Tourism are running it. And they are coming up with small but important points. Again, driven by local opinion, and that's the way it's got to go.
Are there many other burning questions, or should we try and draw this? I've got Warren, yes? Sorry. No, Warren, maybe, yeah. Actually, maybe introduce yourself as well.
Oh, sorry, I'm John Clifford, I live here. Yeah. So I've come on the A66 receiving works.
And he's got a very, very interesting project coming online.
Hopefully on Ellswater.
Maybe he can talk to us about it later.
We've got to get some results. I was wondering, are there examples of these transport hubs working elsewhere? Because it sounds ideal, it sounds great, but I couldn't think of places it works. And the other thing, okay, as you're talking about fisheries, I agree with everything, except he suddenly said strategic and carrying capacity for each valley. And we've been there in fisheries, and you work out the carrying capacity of cod, and then you kill them all, and you think, okay, we'll do haddock. And then you kill all them, and then you think, right, what's carrying capacity for filters? There is a tendency in the way people think strategically to just maximise. Well, as soon as you've got a carrying capacity, you've got a number, you've got some pounds attached, and you can maximise it per valley, and it becomes sometimes very, very destructive, because that's not the scale of space or time that nature works at. That was the only thing where I didn't agree. Yeah, interesting. But yeah, absolutely.
He's going to do something fantastic. He's a professor at York University. He's got a student coming in September who's going to do an evaluation of the fisheries of Ellswater over the last 200 years. Why? There used to be 21 fishing vessels fishing on Ellswater. basically to supply the market in Manchester and elsewhere. And of course, the fish market in Pooley Bridge, which goes back 1,000 years, but people aren't catching fish anymore. And the question is why? What's happened? So here's a student who's going to try and...
Hasn't started yet.
Yeah. Yes, Warren.
Just on your project, which you have discussed, interesting, I did some work on an archive for one of the largest estates in the Lake District, and their estate manager said, as a taxpayer, I'm aghast at the money that has been squandered on ill-conceived environmental projects. As a landowner, we have to take money. And yet, when you talk to the likes of Danny, I was talking to him last year, schemes like this, he said, I talked to the National Park, he said, to an area, and I wanted planting trees, he said, you get more money here, more for your book than by just putting hedgerows in. Quicker, cheaper, environmentally better, biodiversity is quicker than planting trees. And just talking about what that landowners, the land agent said, about money being squandered in there, he's scrapping, and he's short of money for projects like this, it doesn't seem right.
Well, some in the tourism industry think we're the enemy. In terms of the farming community, I can tell you now that our charity are very much on the side of farmers. Like Mike and I have said, people are central to landscape character and managing it going forward. And as Danny and Maddie both explained beautifully, that the lovely thing with hedgerows is that they benefit culture, nature, deep environmental stuff like carbon and water quality, but functionally they're becoming increasingly important for the farmers, for their livestock and everything. So they're an absolute winner. So you're absolutely right. They're undervalued. But, again, zoom out of the detail. Which other countries around the globe have our enclosure pattern? It is central to the beauty of our area and why 18 million people come to our landscape. And so I think working on this is why we've chosen hedgerows. We could have picked 101 different things, but that's partly why we're going for it, because, as you say, it's an absolute no-brainer. We paid farmers to rip them out in the 60s and 70s. Now we pay them to put them back. Hopefully they'll last a bit longer.
So that's what the land agent is saying, this money that the government's giving out says it's being squandered.
Yeah.
And yet you've got schemes like this that are crying out for money.
Well, hopefully we
And again, it's just, the government's dictating, not what the local community wants.
Have we reached an end point? We probably, this conversation could go on for a long time, and it's great fun, and it's great to have that sort of conversation. But I think we should draw it to close now. Thank you so much to both of you for coming here.
Yeah, thank you.
My real apologies that we haven't had the Zooms online. I don't know what's gone wrong. We'll have to sort of rethink that. Particularly knowing your background in the BBC. I don't know. We came here early and tried to plan this all. It's going to go just perfect. I don't understand. Thank you very much indeed for coming along. We've really enjoyed the possibility of engaging with you. From my perspective, from Friends of the Ullswater Way, I hope we can engage more deeply with you on a number of different topics.